Good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks, Scott and Steve, everybody from Covenant, for giving me the opportunity to talk about this notion of a cyber city. It's both good and bad. It's tough to follow Mike, but I think that was a great segue. If the coffee didn't wake you up earlier, Mike's notion about how much constant threat we have going on about us and the increase every day is eye-opening for most. And so the idea of St. Louis as being a cyber city is sort of taking that up a notion and saying, all right, if that's our operating environment, how do we best take advantage of that for our own benefits while we combat this issue? So I am going to talk a little bit about the activity that I'm engaged in on a daily basis and what my passion is with an accelerator that's focused on cybersecurity. And I'm going to talk about some of the lessons that we're learning as we operate in this environment, and it's going to come full circle, hopefully, as we talk about, well, what does a cyber city look like, and what are some models that we're learning as we move through our own business operating processes that we can sort of shape St. Louis's strategy around. And so these first few slides I hope don't seem too self-serving, but there is a point to them. But I wanted to tell you about what 630 Cyber is initially. I moved to St. Louis to work for the St. Louis Regional Chamber, who is trying to bring St. Louis forward in its support for startups and having more venture capital under management in town, and how we can support the innovation ecosystem that's going on by formalizing some of the activity that may be happening organically but a little scattered. And so I moved here a few years ago and have been involved in a number of things in the community, which I hope you've heard of because there's some success in putting St. Louis on the map. T-Rex, for example, is one thing. We have an enormous incubator downtown supporting technology startups. It's large. There's nearly 200 startups in there now. Cortex is another terrific example of what's going on in St. Louis when you put some focused attention to what we can do as a community. And Mike also, in another way, is a great example of the resources in our community when he talks about the neighbor here to the east. We have a strength in financial services in St. Louis, which is amazing with Scottrade, for example, with MasterCard's tech shop out in the west part of our region, with the brokerage firms, with Stifel Nicholas. We have an abundance of financial services company, a lot of people employed in this space, up and down, from PR to actually providing service to customers to protecting the whole enterprise. And in the financial services space, when you're out in the Midwest, it's kind of tough, or it's a little bit harder, let's say, to stay on top of innovation. And when you're in a large corporate environment, it's real difficult to not only identify that innovation that'd be appropriate, but also to incorporate and integrate and make use of that. Because corporations oftentimes, like any big system, right, it recognizes new ideas, and it's built up some antibodies to attack and destroy the introduction of new ideas, right? And so how do we continue to grow the financial services space in our community? One of the ideas that a number of the corporations had, together with some strategic planners and investment community, is, hey, let's go find some of these financial services startups, these fintech startups, bring them to St. Louis and foster their growth here in our community. And the large corporations got involved in this, investors got involved in this, and some of the infrastructure, things like T-Rex, got involved in supporting this idea. So we started 630, which is focused on financial services startups. And 630, for those of you that haven't had this on the Saturday night trivia competition yet, is both the height and width of the arch. So this is the name we gave it rather than other arch or gateway branding. And we started this accelerator 5 years ago now, and we've been bringing in 5 startups at a time, twice a year. We have a pretty good sized portfolio now of a couple of dozen fintech startups. And in a couple of years, a bunch of cybersecurity startups came through that pipeline, called themselves fintech startups because they wanted access to guys like Mike and other folks involved in the financial services and the C-suites here in town. So we decided there was enough there to create a cybersecurity fund and standalone accelerator. And so that became 630 Cyber. So we have two of these entities now that are funding startups, bringing them to town, introducing them into C-suite folks. After, of course, we've done a great job of down selecting from a large pool and screening and vetting these before those introductions are made. But this has been going on for a few years. And then in the fall, we started the cybersecurity aspect, all right? A couple things that are driving this activity, which I think are going to resonate for everybody in this room. The pace and impact of cyber attacks, it's increasing faster than solutions are able to address. These are very smart criminals. They're very active. They're maneuvering and finding weaknesses, and there's a great deal of economic opportunity for them. So it's not going to stop anytime soon. Cyber investment activity is increasing alongside that to combat these threats from both the investment perspective as well as in the IT purchasing side of the business, buying these solutions. And then in St. Louis, we're seeing a lot of industry expertise that can be focused on addressing these issues and particularly in supporting these startups. And we have developed in St. Louis, it's not Silicon Valley yet, but we have started to address the capital needed for these startups to grow. And St. Louis has really, really improved in these past few years in the amount of capital that's under management here and directed towards supporting these startups. It's pretty impressive, actually. And I don't know if you guys have seen some of these statistics, but we've, one study or another, have been ranked best city in the United States for startups. We've seen the most year-over-year increase in capital available to startups. We've had some pretty impressive studies show us at the top of a lot of these rankings. But specifically, I want to just, or maybe I don't need to, Mike's done it, you guys are all professionals. You get the sense that these threats are increasing. Some of the most prestigious global bodies have recognized cybersecurity as the #1 threat that we have ongoing. World Economic Forum, National Intelligence Director, and this was sort of before the recognition that the Russians are finding it advantageous to attack our election processes. And the SEC chairman said that cybersecurity was the biggest risk facing our financial systems. The number of threats is increasing year over year. These are breaches, successful breaches of at least 30,000 records, and this chart could be even deeper and longer. We've seen just the past couple of months the breaches. This past weekend announced a bunch more breaches. Not all these things are recognized, not all these things are public, but those that are both recognized and public, the list is getting fatter and longer. So when it comes to what we're doing from the point of view of addressing solutions, bringing solutions to market, buying these solutions, United States, if you guys can see this chart, is about 77% of the companies established to address cybersecurity. 70% have come from the United States over these 2001 to 15. Israel's the next one at 7% of the global market, and then everybody else. So you can see that the US is the market, is the talent pool, and then following closely behind is Israel. When we talk about the spending on cybersecurity, you guys probably are aware of this in your own budgets. $113 billion in 15, estimated to be $170 billion with a 10% annual growth expected over the next few years. We talk about the cost of cybersecurity attacks. A recent study this month I read, $450 billion was the estimated global cost of cyber attacks last year. The anticipated cost by 2030 to the global economy of cyber attacks, $90 trillion. So how's this translating in returns for the people investing, the people selling, the people involved in bringing these solutions to market? Here's January stock price performance. Lots of green, Palo Alto Networks being an exception to that. Recently, you probably heard about all that going on. And the flow of capital into this market is continuing. There was $9.9 billion of PE invested last year. Nearly $20 billion of M&A occurred in this space, and $4.4 billion invested by venture capitalists in 2016. So there is more capital going into this space because most folks believe the trend will continue and probably rapid. The pace will likely become more rapid. So big picture of that. If this is the operating environment, how can we all benefit from that? How can St. Louis benefit from that marketplace? There's a term coined a couple decades ago that I really value as being somebody involved in investing and supporting entrepreneurship and also thinking through economic development from an infrastructure point of view, from an ecosystem point of view, for the greater St. Louis area. How do we participate in this? And certainly, first and foremost, we have to focus on our own defenses, right? But when you think through what are the solutions we would pursue as customers in this marketplace, and you think about those technologies I would buy, well, wouldn't you want to go a step further and participate in those things? Wouldn't you want those startups to be here in St. Louis so that they can grow, improve our school districts, improve our transportation systems, et cetera? If those products are going to create wealth, wouldn't you like that wealth creation to be here in the St. Louis area? And then globally, how can we provide solutions globally? This is sort of the notion of the triple bottom line. And in addition to measuring my own company's success and bottom line profit, what are the other things that we can do? What are the decisions we can make that are going to improve other bottom lines as well? So that's the triple bottom line notion. And when it comes to cybersecurity, I think we're all starting to get a sense that you just can't buy everything that's at RSA. It's still not going to be sufficient to protect. What we have to do more of is come out of our silos, work together collaboratively within our industry segments, across industry segments, in a community to defend ourselves from cyber attack. And then how does this manifest into helping our community as well? So last year, on his way out the door from being head of Transcom security, he spoke, I think, with you, Mike, that day, and talked about the need that his complaint, being out at Scott Air Force Base and being responsible for logistics across all the departments of defense, Army, Navy, Air Force, these cyber commands have a huge responsibility. A lot of logistics is occurring there. He was a little bit disgruntled that a lot of the corporations here in town were taking his best talent. His middle managers were getting recruited away from corporations or integrators or service providers. And so it was tough for him to recruit. He doesn't have the salaries to compete, but he said he appreciated and understood how everybody was fighting this battle. But secondly, he said he needed to collaborate. He needed his folks to come across the river to get involved into programs with corporations, with universities, and talk about what the current threats are and what are the solutions that are working. And it's only in that way would he be able to fulfill his mission on behalf of the president. And then also at RSA, I just recently heard that all this technology is terrific, but where the real advances in technology is where tools enable greater collaboration. When you can when you have enough data sources and inputs that you can start to make sense of the weak signals, all right? And that's both in a digital sense, but then also in an interpersonal sense as well. Okay, so a little bit about big picture again is this is a slide that I took from Tony and I and Patty Hagan. Dr. Hagan is head of T-Rex here in town, and she was also responsible for research at SLU a few years before that. The notion of an economic cluster, right? So we talked about financial services. We have a strength in financial services that we're probably all aware of. In Silicon Valley, there's a couple of strengths. In Cleveland, there's a biomedical and cardiological strength. In different parts of the country, we've developed these economic clusters. And when you have a couple of big companies with some big successes, they start to spin out entrepreneurs, executives who start new companies. And the capital from the wealth created in that business supports the growth of those startups. And pretty soon you start having little companies grow up and beget new companies, and you start this cluster. And we have that in financial services now, and there's a good likelihood, we believe, that if we focused ourselves in this notion of cybersecurity, that we could create that in St. Louis as well. Oh, one more thing down at the bottom of, sorry, my slide got a little messed up, but there's roughly 1 million cybersecurity job openings, and this is a low estimate. I've seen twice as high current unfilled cybersecurity opportunity jobs in the United States right now, and that's expected to go to 1.5 by this conservative study I read by 2019. So the marketplace is almost demanding that we do this. It's an opportunity for us as a region to consider putting resources towards. So St. Louis as a cyber city, how? And so this is where I start to bring this full circle, for me anyway, over the past year, when we have looked at where the cybersecurity startups are coming from, where the best technologies, best opportunities, best investment opportunities for us as a fund, where we're a small $10 million fund, but where would we put our money to have the greatest return? We have looked to Israel as one of those places, one of those sources of startups. And why is that? You guys might have heard on the news recently, there's an organization here called Coalition for Plant Life Science initially, and it's called BioSTL, and now they're changing their name to Global STL as they get the message out and find that globally, St. Louis is a real attractant for technology startups. They have a full-time person operating in Tel Aviv right now who just sells the story of St. Louis to Israeli companies, the startup and the more mature ones, about if you're looking to expand in the United States, consider St. Louis first. The state of Missouri has a full-time person operating in Israel. Why are they doing that? A lot of it comes, there's a great book that I would recommend. It's a great book that I would recommend, came out in 2009, and I just recently reread it, and it's really incredible. It explains why the nation of Israel is so fantastic at commercializing technology, coming up with the technology, commercializing the technology, funding and feeding and nurturing the companies to grow. And there's a number of parts to this, and I'll get to it, but statistically, if you look at it, it's a country of 8 million people. This is something I took off the jacket. Actually, when it came out, it was 7.1 million people, surrounded by enemies, constant state of war since its founding, no natural resources, olives, produces more startup companies than large, peaceful, and stable nations like Japan, China, India, Korea, and Canada. Israel has more high-tech startups, according to a recent economist, and a larger venture capital industry per capita than any other country in the world. 3 times more capita per person venture capital than the United States, 200 times more venture capital per capita than in China. And then in between is the rest of the world. Israel's done an incredible job of attracting technologists, helping them take their ideas, fund them, and move them out. And what is it about the culture that enables them to do that? One of the things that I've discovered, and right before RSA, that Mike referenced, which is the biggest conference in the United States, globally, for cybersecurity technology, right before I was in Israel for Cyber Tech Tel Aviv 2017, and it is the largest cybersecurity conference outside the United States. Why in tiny little Israel, where it's not easy to get to or easy to get in, would all this concentration be? I got a chance to meet a lot of startups, and there's 300 new startups in the past 3 years in cybersecurity. Where's it coming from? Why is it? It's the environment. It's a nurturing environment. I mentioned T-Rex downtown. In a community like ours, a few million people, we have 4 or 5 pretty good incubators. In Israel, country of 7 million people, I think 8 now, but 7 million people, there's 120 incubators. So the environment for a young technology team to take the steps, the risk associated in Israel, it's a much more nurturing environment for that. So the environment's a big part, but another big part is this notion of Unit 8200, the Israeli Defense Forces. 8200 is responsible, well, it's probably, I think they say about 5,000 people. It's a very secretive organization. They don't talk a lot about what goes on in 8200, but let's say it's about 5,000 people that are focused and have been focused for about 35, 40 years, both offensively and defensively, to protect the nation state of Israel electronically. It's digital, it's data, it's networks, it's systems, but also use it, and this is on par, by the way, in Israel, Army, Navy, Air Force, cybersecurity. It's on par with the other defense forces, right? So you think about this as a culture that's been going on for decades. You recognize that they're constantly under threat. They can't trust that they're always going to have access to technology from abroad, so they've got to create everything new. They're constantly innovating and creating with a lot less dollars than other developed countries might have. So all these things contribute to their innovation. So a little bit more about 8200. Screening. To get into 8200, there's not an application process. They are recognizing people in junior high and in high school and are putting them quietly through tests and programs and events and weekends and starting to select who they want to come into 8200. All right? It's an engagement process. Oh! Okay. I will apologize because I've spoken way too long. Culture, churn, and the network, these things are probably intuitive to a lot of you. I'd love to talk to you about them in more detail. It's very interesting. This book is very interesting. There's a lot of great articles out there right now about this culture and how we can bring that home to St. Louis. And I wanted to bring attention to how you might get involved. Tony, if you wouldn't mind waving. Tony is with Midwest Cyber Center here in town. This is one of the resources in our community that's working on this big picture. How do we create the workforce? How do we get the schools engaged so that we can all fill these positions and continue to function optimally as a community? Okay, thank you very much. And do I have a question opportunity, or should I just get off the stage and talk later? Okay, so I look forward to meeting any of you in the back of the room as the day progresses. Sorry, I talked way too long.